Oh, I see. All right, he's still in jail. Here we go. Found it. Yeah, Joseph. There's a man named Joseph in the Bible. We've been talking about him for the last 2 weeks, so. Did y'all know that? Okay. It's all coming back to you now. So when I was a kid, my mom would listen to the radio and listen to what I thought was the only music options in the world. Yeah, we're basically at 41. Yeah, 41. Chapter 41. And so I thought that Kenny G and Michael Bolton and Enya were the only music artists in the world. So I remember telling my friends, I don't like music. It's all coming back to me now. Okay. That's why I don't sing solos. I just needed some anger in my life. And I found out what Metallica was. I'm like, oh, I do like music. Yeah. Okay. All right, we are in Genesis chapter 41. Everybody all right? I'm doing great. I went away to Florence, Alabama for 3 days this end of the week. Left Thursday, did a conference on Friday, and then Saturday came back. It was fun. Well, yeah, new and improved is one way to put it. But it was good. It was really good. Heritage Christian University Alumni Conference. Got to meet a bunch of students that I've only seen online before. I saw a bunch of my classmates I'm in class with right now. I'm like, hey, I know your face. You talk a whole lot in class. I go, oh, yeah, that's me. I'm like, uh-huh. So it was good. Actually meeting people in real life, face-to-face, as opposed to on the internet for education. So it was fun. All right. It's okay. I wouldn't call out Sharon like I call out you, Lisa. All right. Life of Joseph. I ran the structure of Joseph being thrown in the pit by his brothers, and then Jacob, when he thought that his favorite son, was dead, says, "My soul will not come out of the pit." And then him describing himself in jail being in a pit. I ran that structure past my critical Old Testament professor. I said, what do you think about that? He goes, oh yeah, you could do it in the English. I go, so that's not how it looks in the Hebrew? He goes, not even close. I go, okay. So in the English, that 3-point thing of him being in the pit has merit, the idea being down there. But when Jacob said that his soul will not come out of the pit of anguish, that word is Sheol, and that's the pit of the realm of the dead after this life is over. So I thought that was interesting that I saw that when I was teaching this class, and I wanted to see, what do you think about this? He goes, in the English it works. I go, okay. It's a very polite way to say, so. So the pit, when Joseph is thrown into the pit by his brothers, that word is not Sheol, it's just the word for a big hole. And then when he's in jail, I'm in a place of darkness. And then when Jacob says, my soul will not leave the pit in the English, it means Sheol. So I'm going to go to my grave, essentially, and grief over my son, my favorite son being dead. So anyway, I want to see what he would think. I wanted him to be impressed, and he wasn't impressed. So, oh well. Okay. Life of Joseph. So far, to recap where we've been so far, the movements of his life. We have him as a 17-year-old kid working on the farm with his brothers. He is the favorite son of his father, to the much chagrin of his other siblings. We have a coat, either of many colors or with sleeves. And again, he says, I asked my professor again, I'm like, so what is it? Is it a color or is it sleeves? He goes, I don't know. I'm like, okay, great. So no one knows. So he has a coat, and that makes him stand out. His brothers are envious of him. He has 2 dreams in which he interprets his brothers bowing down before his authority, and even his parents bowing down before his authority. He decides it's a good idea to tell his family that dream, and it's not a good idea from our perspective in that timeline, because the brothers betray him, throw him in a pit. They want to kill him, but instead they sell him as a slave to those that are going to Egypt to buy and sell trade. And so he ends up as a slave in Egypt, which is a typology if you've not seen it. Slavery in Egypt begins here, ultimately. He works for the commander of the army of Pharaoh, and so Potiphar is his name. He rises through the ranks quite quickly, it seems, from the text, to be in charge of all of Potiphar's household, including all his wealth and supplies and all of that. Potiphar's wife is attracted to him. She makes a pass at him, and he declines, and day after day he tries to avoid circumstances in which he's in that environment of temptation again. There's one incident that just so happened to where he was alone with her in the house. She came on to him. He ran away and left his tunic behind because she was holding on to it. And she lied to her husband and to her household about what took place. And we have a lot of discussion about that, on whether or not Potiphar knew that his wife was, I forget the word we used, but scumbag, that's the word. How could I forget that word? But whatever the case, he ends up in jail. He's there, and he's such a good guy that the officer in charge of the jail or the prison puts him in charge of all the prisoners. So you've got this baker of the king, and you've got the cupbearer of the king thrown in there. They both have dreams, and wouldn't you know it, Joseph can interpret dreams. One says, hey, 3 days from now you will be restored to your place. And then the baker's dream is like, hey, 3 days from now you're going to lose your head. So mixed bag, right? And then the only request he had was that when they get out of prison and they're standing before Pharaoh, please remember me, Joseph, because I'm in this pit and I don't deserve to be here. And then, so chapter 40, verse 23, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. He had other things on his mind. So that's where we left off. Picking up in chapter 41, verse 1, after 2 whole years. Does 2 years feel like a long time or a short time? That's the exact answer I was hoping you'd say. It depends on what's going on. Did you know, April 1, I would have been here for 2 whole years? Does it feel like a short time or a long time? Well, it depends who you are. It all depends, Betty. What's that? Depends on your age, I guess. Yeah. I will have been, is that better? No. So you want present tense, not past tense? Oh, man. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going anywhere.
This is future.
Well, I'm sure. You're stuck with me. You got a problem with me, you better tell me now. I'll try to do my best to work on it, but other than that, hey. What's that? Start now? Yeah, tell me. After. Well, you are. All right, chapter 41, verse 1. Oh, you guys are? Some of you are. Okay.
Lisa is too.
Moving on. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came. So the King James I grew up with as a new convert, so I knew King James, and then when I went to, I knew not the new King James, old King James, I guess. Went to preaching school, I had to use the King James. When I got to ministry, I realized I was spending more time explaining the King James English than I was actually preaching the text. So I'm like, well, we'll try something else. So when I read this, and I love that occasionally you'll find, and behold, and just suddenly just like, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, as attractive a cow can be, I suppose. And they fed in the reed grass. The reed grass, by the way, is the source from which these reeds are cut into strips, and they are dried, and their resin on the inside is like an adhesive, and they are glued together flat to make papyrus. So papyrus literally means the reed. So here's the reed grass. So papyrus is the paper they used to use. Okay, just making sure. All right, verse 3. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. There's a joke in there somewhere about the more plump you are, the more attractive you are, but I'm going to leave that alone. And Pharaoh awoke. Verse 5, and he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. There's a whole study you could do if you were so inclined about the east wind. It's full there. It's a figure of, it's a rhetorical device. The east wind's literally not an east wind. It's a description of a kind of usually judgment upon a nation, but that's what we find here. Verse 7, and thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled. He sent and called for all the magi, is the word. This is the same kind of thing we're talking about a little bit when you go to the New Testament and you have the wise men from the east. And we know that there are 3 because tradition tells us so, that there were 3 gifts and 3 magi, right? Okay. Most of y'all get that. If you don't, we don't know how many there were, but there were 3 gifts. So if you got 4 magi and 3 gifts, 1 guy skimped out, whatever the case. So you have these magicians, is what it says in the English, soothsayers, fortune tellers, witches, all that kind of thing, and that supernatural realm of falsity is in there. So anyway, for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. And then verse 9. After 2 years, right? Living pretty well, I would imagine. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, you know what? I know a guy. I remember my offenses today. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in the custody of the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with his own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us. Let me just pause right there and make a comment. So, are the terms Hebrew and Jew interchangeable biblically? Don't know? Okay, let me explain. So Hebrew comes from the sons of Noah, from which they came Shem, so that became that. Hebrew, of course, is the language they would have spoken at this time, because this would be recorded by Moses a little bit later in Hebrew. But also the name Jew, I want to kind of explain that just a little bit politically, because both are used interchangeably today, but back then you wouldn't have called Joseph a Jew, you called him a Hebrew. And the reason for that is because after the captivity of Israel from like the Minor Prophets region we were in a little while ago, a kind of a slang term was used for people from Judah, those that are Jews. And so that became into the English from that reason. So when you see Jew or you see Hebrew, from our perspective and the timeline now, they are interchangeable. Here he would have been called a Hebrew, so those from the Hebrew nation, that clan really is what it's more like. Only reason why I bring that up here is so you know the history of that, just for your own, encouragement. But also there was a situation I was involved in one time where I was trying out for a church, and there was a guy who had a soapbox about the idea of why am I calling the Jews Hebrews or the Hebrews Jews, from the book of Hebrews after all. And so he really dug into that. I'm like, I'm not sure what your question is here. They're used interchangeably, and that popped up as a little unusual. So I want to explain that just so you know for your identification. Okay, A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker didn't make it. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. They quickly brought him out of where? The pit. All right, not Sheol, but the pit. What's that? That's the first one. This is a dark place. Okay. And when he had... What's that? A dungeon? Okay. Well, your Bible does?
Mine does.
What you guys carrying?
Today, yes.
What translation is that?
American
Christian,
Standard.
and mine's Christian Standard.
All right, CSB and ASV? Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting. All right.
New American Standard has dungeon also.
Really? Okay. Let's see what it is. Three up ways.
NIV says dungeon as well.
Sounds like a bad place.
Dungeon. It's not great, right? This is the ESV, so this for reference if you don't know. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, which is of course important to do when you're presented before the king of Egypt, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. So pretty straightforward stuff here. Pharaoh's had a dream, doesn't know what it means. His advisors, his magi, his soothsayers, whatever you want to call them, they can't figure it out. I mean, they could have probably guessed, I suppose. But if you already know this story, this narrative, then you know what's about to happen. Pretty important stuff. I would imagine that God gave him that dream with that interpretation to, hopefully, if this is how God saw it, to restore Joseph to the proper place. Because he's been suffering here for no just cause. I mean, he was betrayed by his own brothers. That's bad. Became a slave. Not great. Lied about by Potiphar's wife and thrown into jail for over 2 years, it seems. Not great. But the Lord's will is still, you can see it working through these terrible circumstances. The Lord's still bringing about his will. And we'll see as we continue on the narrative how Joseph, in a very wise and pious way, is allowing these circumstances to shape his perspective on these bad things. And that's why I want to talk about him so much, is because we can learn so much from being able to go through terrible things but still be able to trust in the Lord's will being done even in those terrible things. That's the main lesson I get from Joseph. And it's a good reminder for all of us. Chris?
I'm assuming that Joseph probably learned the language as he, through the years, being in Potiphar's house and being a slave, so that they could communicate with Pharaoh. I'm obviously Pharaoh's communicating with Joseph.
You know, I've never thought about that. But I do know that you got the Midianites that were traveling through, and they were able to buy and sell and trade. So we had commerce going on. So it may have been, because, I mean, the Hebrew nation is not really a nation. It's just a clan at this point in time, a tribe, not even really a tribe. And so they would have been more than likely involved in trade and commerce the same way that the slavers were when they walked by the pit. And so I imagine that there was some fluidity to be able to at least interpret a little bit with the Egyptian and their language. That's an interesting point, though. I mean, I don't know Spanish. I can get by, though. Yeah, I can. My Spanglish is pretty good. Like, I know a couple of words, and I'll say "como se dice," and I'll say the word. So you can kind of get by a little bit. So I don't know if he has an interpreter here, or if he's learned the language, or if he already knew the language. It's not revealed to us. But that's an interesting point. But that's verse 15.
10, 13, 15 years, something to learn the language by now.
And we know that God gave him whatever he needed to
People come
God
here
where he
from-
was, and Potiphar might have taught him Egyptian. He might have already known it.
Well, he did communicate with Potiphar's wife pretty clearly. I mean,
He's
at
very
least in
smart.
body language by running out of the house, right?
He's a
So,
very smart man.
yeah. So maybe he already knew it. I don't know. They weren't speaking Hebrew in Egypt. I know that much. Not yet, anyway. They
Well, you
were.
know, it's easier to learn a language when you're living in the land of.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like us trying to learn a foreign language here when you go out and speak English.
Yeah, that's true.
But if you're living in the land, you're going to pick it up more because you're going to hear it
Yeah,
constantly used.
my youth minister kind of guy, my preacher's brother who came to be our youth guy in Boston when I was a new convert, he got frustrated with some situations he was going through when working in local congregations, so he decided, I want to buy a plane ticket to Peru. So he moved to Peru, and he found a couple at the airport and said, can I live at your house? And they said, you can live in our garage. He goes, perfect. And so he just immersed himself in Spanish in Peru and lived there, Costa Rica, not Peru, Costa Rica. And he just lived in their garage for about a year, and he was fluent in Spanish when he came back. And so, I see your point there. All right. The sidetrack is Chris. Thanks, Chris. Chasing some rabbits this morning. That's all right. All right, verse 16. Joseph answered Pharaoh, and this is, again, just stellar stuff here from this guy. It is not in me. God, Yahweh, Jehovah, will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. I mean, this is just, you don't see him really mess up at all during all of this. Like, this is so stellar to me. When you read the ancient Near East literature, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, these guys are just, they're rock stars and they're gods, and they battle the sun and moon and stars, and they cause comets to come down. I mean, Genesis is very grounded because we're looking at people that are human, that make terrible mistakes. They're communicating with God and they lie to him. God sends a messenger, and then one of them tries to wrestle him to the ground. Like, it's just very human in contrast to the epics of the ancient Near East culture of the Chaldeans, Babylonians, for example. And so when you see a guy like Joseph who doesn't, according to the text, make dramatic mistakes when it comes to God, it's something unique, which is a little unusual. So anyway, he's giving the credit to not himself, his own power, his own authority. He's giving it to God, which again, great. Verse 17, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile. Now, he tells him the dream. This is in contrast to what we read in the book of Daniel, because there's a king there who has a dream. He doesn't trust his advisors, it seems, because he's like, hey, you tell me what dream I had and then give me the interpretation to prove you know what's going on. And nobody could but our boy Daniel. And so this guy is like, here's the dream, don't know what it means. Verse 18, 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. By the way, that gives you a good little clue as to what the land of Egypt was like. Right? He's like, I've never seen a thin cow. Like, well, it must be nice, right? You got all kinds of food because of that Nile River. They were the empire, if you will, at this time. All right, can somebody read verses 21 through 24?
Then I woke up. In my dream, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were blighted, shriveled, and withered by the east wind. And the shriveled heads swallowed the 7 healthy heads. I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they mean.
Okay, that's a different translation. Which one is that?
That's so precious.
I asked you one question this morning. What do you want?
NLT.
New Living Translation.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So, I've been places before where it was discouraged to use a different translation than the one that the preacher uses or the elders use. I want to let you know, I've heard like 4 different thus far, and I really appreciate that. I just want to tell you that because I've talked about translations before. I've got my favorites, but I've also written articles recently about the idea of using different translations to get a different perspective on what the text actually says. For someone like me, when I hear it in a different translation, it makes me slow down and figure out, oh, it's said in a different word order, different words are used there. I wonder why that is. And then I'm curious enough to go look at it and see why they might have changed the order. The content's still essentially the same, right? There's no issue with that. But to me, it's interesting to see it in different translations in English because it helps me appreciate the text a bit more because they considered these words from the Hebrew, from the Aramaic, and from the Greek very carefully for a long time to make that translation available. So I just want to say, for what it's worth to you, that I appreciate you guys using different translations. It's totally okay with me. Okay. So there's the dream. Then verse 25, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. Meaning that those 2 visions that you got, those 2 dreams that you had, they mean one message. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 good ears of wheat are 7 years. The dreams are 1. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. So if you don't know the narrative or the story already, what's being revealed here is you've got 7 years to make hay while the sun shines. Absolutely. I grew up on a farm, as you can tell. No, I didn't. I grew next to a farm. Okay. So 7 years to go ahead and prepare for 7 years of famine. Now, anyone venture a guess what I'm about to say next? No? Okay. That's okay. You're not mind readers. I don't expect too much of you. But isn't it funny how there are 7 years? These Bible and their numbers, I'll tell you what. Now, I'm not going to suggest that it's not literal, it's metaphorical here, because it seems to be written as a way that means it's literal. But it's just interesting how these things just happen. Like the number 3, number 7, number 10, 12, 24. Just weird how they all work out to mean the same thing, kind of. Anyway. Okay. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow. So it's interesting how that's phrased, but it's kind of like when you have the good years and then bad years come. It's almost like you forget all the good years that you had. Do you find it to be true in your life? Yeah, it's one of those human experiences, right? When things are bad, you kind of forget all the blessing that you've got. Every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness or shadow of turning, right? So all the good things we have in life are from whom? God. Every good and perfect gift come from Him. And then sometimes when He sends us through the valley of the shadow of death, we kind of forget all the good things that we had. And so I guess my point for emphasizing that is to remind myself that when things get bad, I mean, it's all about perspective and comparison and remembering that the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. I mean, Job knew that for a long time. Okay. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God and God will shortly bring it about. Now that's new information to me. How did Joseph know it? Well, I guess God told him. I mean, that's an easy cop-out answer, right? But this is an interesting kind of dynamic here. You don't really have much said about the interpretation of dreams in the Old or New Testament. You just kind of have the facts, which is the whole point of why it's recorded in the first place. But it is interesting that there was some kind of dynamic here of it being doubled. Joseph knew that God's like, yeah, for sure, this is definitely going to happen. Yeah, I guess, right? Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Interesting, though. We don't see that, to my recollection, which is not great. I don't remember reading that really anywhere else. But the doubling of the vision means it's definitely going to happen. Like Daniel would be the book to go to for this kind of thing, and I don't remember it in Daniel. So, anyway. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man. Well, it's like, Pharaoh, you know what you need? You need a guy that you can trust. I mean, the guy you got out of jail, I'm pretty trustworthy. I was running that place for 2 whole years now. And set him over, I don't know why I turned to Bill Clinton there, but there he is. And you know what you need, Pharaoh? Let me tell you. Let me get my saxophone out. Okay, moving on. And set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh, that's the closest I got to talking about politics in the pulpit, right there. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers, which is the word you think it is, over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. So what's he recommending here? This is a money market account right here. No, he's just saying, listen, we have 7 years to get prepared for 7 years of famine. And so what we're going to do is we're going to lay by in store as we've been prospering for a rainy day fund that we know is coming. Interesting, huh? It's weird. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. The food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. Okay, stepping back a little bit. If Joseph wasn't accessible, just imagine that dynamic. You've got God bringing famine upon the land of Egypt, of all places, the place where you go when there's a famine, right? Because they have the Nile, they have the water, they have the grain, they have food there for trade and for Pharaoh and his empire. And so if they had 7 years of plenty and didn't know that they were about to have 7 years of famine, they wouldn't have enough. That would impact not just the Egyptian empire, but also all of those that would come to Egypt for a refuge during this famine. So again, big picture stuff here. Joseph was born for such a time as this, to borrow it from Esther, right? This is one of those moments where you kind of see, oh, so Joseph was in the right place at the right time for the right purpose. And God allowed him to be there for that empire and for his own family. If God didn't allow Joseph to go through these series of trials, of difficulties, then the impact on history would be quite different. That's interesting to me, because do you think about your life that way? I don't. Like when a bad thing happens to me, I'm just like, what did I do? I'm the Job. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on here? I don't think, well, you know what? Whatever this circumstance is, it's going to be bringing about the will of God, no matter what happens. Mm-hmm.
Because there's instances in my life and things have happened that God gave me the answer for it, but I saw the working of the answer before the situation came about, but during the situation I wouldn't have seen it. But now I'm looking saying, oh, this started happening so that this happens for me.
Yeah, when I look back, I'm able to like, oh, if I wasn't here, like for me, the biggest thing that I think about immediately is all the tryouts I've gone on in my career. I've gone through 2 major movements of going to find a congregation that I fit in somewhat well with and that I can be a blessing to, and they can bless our family as well. And seeing different places and thinking that that was the golden ticket, right, of the Willy Wonka factory. And like I get a call and I'm not chosen. I'm like, wow, God, that was the place. And then I look back, I'm like, I would have been terrible there and miserable, and it's not the place for me to be. But the places that I've been led and been brought into, looking at it now, I'm like, of course I was meant to go there. That was the place the whole time. I just couldn't see it. So that's the clearest thing I've got, because my own spirituality and my own family dynamic financially is dependent on God taking me to the place where I can do the most good for the most people and be a blessing to them, and they bless us as well. So I can see it when I look back. Mm-hmm.
Builds your confidence in the fact that God's going to take care of you in the future also.
Absolutely.
So that's what builds your faith in that.
And this is a good reminder for me in this story. So hopefully that can encourage you as well. That whatever you're going through, either now or 7 years from now, the He's got you. He's going to protect you and lead you through this life. Just don't forget He's the one in control, because Joseph apparently didn't. We don't see a wavering of faith at all in Joseph according to the text. Now, I might have been there in that dark dungeon that he was in, but anyway, interesting. All right. Questions, comments, additions? I'm trying to make some practical application for you. This is, it's an important Bible narrative. I mean, the Bible builds on these stories, on these narratives. So if you don't know the story, like I didn't when I was coming to church for the first time, I want to tell you the story, the narrative. But also, if you've heard this your whole life, then I want to make sure you walk away with something that's useful. So hopefully that's being done. If not, I'm trying. Okay, anything else? All right, we got 6 whole minutes. Let's rock and roll. Verse 37. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Well, I wouldn't read too much into that, because the language there is not as positive as you may assume. I mean, you might imagine, if this whole thing works out the way that Joseph did, that maybe Pharaoh should realize that there's no other God but the one creator God, Yahweh. But if you know the book of Exodus, it doesn't quite work out that way. All right, hang on. So, we took a trip last year. This is chasing a rabbit, kinda, so bear with me. We took a trip last year, and we were at this place in Charleston, and there was no internet. How do you survive with children without the internet? Well, I'll tell you how you do it, with a Blu-ray player. That's how you do it. Yeah, that's how you do it. Now, it's just in the evenings to kind of wind down from walking around Charleston and visiting people and seeing old friends. You just need something kind of entertaining. And there was a DVD present at this location, and it was The Prince of Egypt, Disney classic. If you've never seen it, highly recommend it. It's got some exaggeration, to say the least, but it's a pretty good Disney movie. And Maddie and Luke have never seen it. Melissa had never seen it. I had never seen it. And so we're like, this is the one Disney movie she's never seen. We got to watch it. So we watched it. And I'll tell you what, that's a good little Disney movie. But to take away from that, Maddie and Luke, every single day, wanted to watch, guess what? The Prince of Egypt. Even the scary parts, which is interesting because Maddie's not usually interested in that kind of stuff. So we recently got a new van for the family, which is much more comfortable than a subcompact SUV, a bit more room. And there just happened, I wouldn't have chose it for this reason. There's a DVD, a Blu-ray player screen in there. So we have like 2 DVDs, like physical DVDs nowadays. So we asked the kids, what DVDs, what movies do you want to watch on car trips? And guess what their answer was? The Prince of Egypt. Everywhere we go, we had these children throw on the headphones and watch The Prince of Egypt. And so when I look at this and I see this whole dynamic, and then I know the story of the Exodus, and then seeing my children fall in love with the story of the Exodus. I mean, based on their Bible classes where they're hearing these names, they're hearing these stories from childhood, and they're falling in love with these stories because of that movie. I just appreciate so much that we as the people of God can open up these ancient stories and still pull such great lessons from the Word of God. And this is an old book we're looking at here. It's ancient Near East literature, different culture, different language. But these stories are the ones that God has preserved for us to read, to learn, to show us more about who He is and who we are in light of that. So I want to give you that little lesson there at the end before we go too much further, because the rest is pretty straightforward. Next week, Lord willing, we'll be able to get to the part where Joseph does what I think I would do. If you had a chance to mess with your own siblings as payback, would you do that? Joseph did. So it's fun. All right, well, we'll pick up here next week, Lord willing. We have about 16 minutes until Bible class begins. Sure, go ahead.
Isn't it interesting that Pharaoh was so willing to say, oh, he's filled with the Spirit of God?
Mm-hmm.
Why does he care?
Yeah.
How does he care? You know, God works in mysterious ways.
I mean, it worked out well for him.
Well, yes.
There shouldn't have been any doubt after this situation that there was one God, and it was Joseph's God.
Situation, but not before the situation.
That's true. It's true. And because the new Pharaoh rose up in Exodus chapter 1, didn't know this whole dynamic, this whole story, then they were afraid of the Hebrews, and then God made himself known through his miracles. Okay. All right, we'll pause here.